Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, even though nothing obvious happened? No argument, no insult, no threat. And yet somehow you felt guilty, uncertain, or emotionally drained. What if I told you that some of the most powerful forms of manipulation happen without a single raised voice? What if someone could influence your decisions, emotions, and behavior without you even realizing it? Most people think manipulation is obvious. They imagine lies, threats, or control. But real manipulation is far more dangerous because the most effective manipulators never force you. They guide you, quietly, patiently. Psychology reveals a disturbing truth about human behavior. People can be influenced through emotional triggers they don't even know exist. And once you understand these hidden mechanisms, you'll begin noticing them everywhere, in friendships, relationships, workplaces, even within your own family. One of the darkest psychological concepts is something called projection. Imagine someone accusing you of being selfish. They criticize your behavior repeatedly. They make you question yourself. But here's the secret. Often, they are describing themselves. Projection occurs when people unconsciously place their own flaws onto others because accepting those flaws would damage their self-image. The liar accuses others of lying. The insecure person calls others arrogant. The dishonest person becomes obsessed with exposing dishonesty. Suddenly, people's behavior starts looking very different. But projection is only the beginning. Beneath every personality exists something psychologists call the shadow. The shadow contains the parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge: our envy, our selfishness, our anger, our hidden desires. Most people spend their entire lives pretending these parts don't exist. But the shadow never disappears. It simply finds other ways to express itself. This is why someone can appear kind while secretly enjoying another person's failure, why a friend can smile while feeling jealous, why people sometimes sabotage those they claim to support. The shadow always finds a way out, and manipulators know exactly how to use this. They understand something most people never learn. Human beings are emotional creatures pretending to be logical. Think about that carefully. People believe they make decisions through reason, but emotions usually make the decision first. Logic simply arrives later to justify it. That's why manipulation works. Not because people are weak, but because emotions are powerful. A skilled manipulator doesn't attack your intelligence. They target your emotions, your fear, your loneliness, your desire for approval, your need to belong. And once those emotional buttons are discovered, controlling behavior becomes much easier. But perhaps the most disturbing pattern is something known as crab mentality. Imagine a bucket filled with crabs. Whenever one crab tries to climb out, the others pull it back down. Humans often do the same, not always consciously, not always intentionally, but often. Someone starts succeeding, someone starts improving, someone begins chasing a bigger dream, and suddenly criticism appears, doubt appears, discouragement appears. Why? Because your growth forces others to confront their own limitations, and for some people, that's uncomfortable. So instead of rising with you, they try to pull you back, not because they hate you, but because your progress reminds them of what they're avoiding. Now, here's the question that changes everything. What if some of the manipulation affecting your life isn't coming from strangers? What if it's coming from people you trust, people you love, people you listen to every day? Because the most dangerous manipulation rarely comes from enemies. It often comes wrapped in concern, advice, affection, and familiarity. And once you understand the next psychological technique, you'll never hear certain conversations the same way again. If you're enjoying these psychological insights, subscribe to Human Secrets Hub, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Now, we're uncovering the emotional manipulation pattern that makes good people question their own reality without even realizing it's happening. If you've ever felt this pain, if you've ever walked away from a relationship wondering whether you were the problem, if you've ever questioned your own memory, judgment, or worth, then what you're about to hear may explain more than you realize. One of the most powerful forms of emotional manipulation happens when someone slowly makes you doubt your own reality. Not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but little by little. A comment here, a denial there, a subtle twist of the truth, until eventually you stop trusting yourself and start trusting them instead. This psychological pattern is dangerous because it attacks confidence at its root. When confidence disappears, control becomes easier. To understand this, consider the story of Emma. Emma was intelligent, kind, and independent. When she met Daniel, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, attentive, supportive, at least in the beginning. But over time, small things started happening. When Emma remembered a conversation, Daniel would insist it never happened. When she expressed hurt, he would tell her she was being too sensitive. When she confronted him about something troubling, he somehow turned the conversation back onto her. At first, Emma ignored it. Then she started questioning herself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I'm the problem. Months passed, and something strange happened. Emma stopped trusting her own thoughts. The more she doubted herself, the more power Daniel gained. That is how emotional manipulation often works. It doesn't destroy people instantly, it slowly reshapes how they see themselves. And here's the unsettling part. Many manipulators don't even realize what they're doing. Their behavior is often driven by insecurity, fear, ego defense mechanisms, or an unconscious need for control. But the damage is real, regardless of intention. Perhaps you've experienced something similar. A friend who always made you feel guilty, a partner who made you question your instincts, a coworker who constantly shifted blame, a family member who used shame to influence your decisions. The emotional weight builds quietly, and over time, it affects confidence, relationships, and even personal growth. Because when people spend all their energy defending themselves, they stop investing energy in becoming themselves. But here's the question that changes everything. What happens when you finally recognize the pattern? What happens when you stop seeing yourself through their words and start seeing the situation objectively? Now, we're going to uncover the psychological shifts that transform someone from being manipulated into someone who can see manipulation before it even begins. The moment you recognize manipulation, something powerful begins to happen. You stop reacting automatically. You start observing, and that shift changes everything. Most people experience life emotionally first and consciously second. They react to pressure, guilt, fear, and approval without realizing what's happening beneath the surface. Manipulators depend on this. They need reactions. They need emotional control. But once you become an observer, their influence starts weakening. This is where the power shift begins. The first mindset shift is simple. Pause before reacting. Psychologists call this creating emotional distance. When someone pressures you, criticizes you, or tries to provoke you, your brain wants an immediate response. But emotional reactions often benefit the manipulator. Imagine a coworker publicly questioning your competence. Your instinct may be to defend yourself immediately. Instead, pause. Observe. ask questions. The person expecting an emotional reaction suddenly loses control of the situation. The pause creates power. The second mindset shift is understanding patterns instead of isolated events. Many people evaluate behavior one incident at a time. Manipulators rely on this. A single guilt trip may seem harmless. A single lie may seem insignificant. A single insult may appear accidental. But psychology teaches us that patterns reveal intentions. When you stop asking, "What happened today?" and start asking, "What keeps happening repeatedly?" clarity begins to emerge. Suddenly, confusion disappears. The pattern tells the story. The third mindset shift involves understanding emotional triggers. Every person has emotional buttons: fear of rejection, fear of conflict, need for approval, desire to be liked. Manipulators often discover these weaknesses and use them strategically. But when you identify your own triggers, they lose much of their power. Imagine someone says, "If you really cared about me, you would do this." For many people, that sentence triggers guilt. But once you recognize the trigger, you can separate emotion from reality. You begin asking, "Is this a genuine request? Or is this emotional pressure?" That awareness changes your decisions. The fourth mindset shift may be the most important. Stop seeking validation from people who benefit from your self-doubt. Think about that carefully. Some individuals gain influence when you feel insecure. They gain control when you constantly seek their approval. The more uncertain you become, the more powerful they feel. But when self-worth comes from within rather than from external validation, manipulation becomes far less effective. Their approval is no longer your source of confidence. Their criticism is no longer your source of fear. And suddenly, the dynamic changes. You are no longer easy to control. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean distrusting everyone. It means becoming psychologically aware. Aware of patterns, aware of emotional triggers, aware of the hidden forces influencing human behavior. Because the greatest defense against manipulation isn't aggression, it's awareness. And yet there is one final psychological truth that most people never discover. A truth so powerful that once you understand it, you'll see manipulation, power, and human behavior through an entirely different lens. And in part 4, we're uncovering the revelation that changes everything. What if the greatest manipulation you've ever experienced wasn't from another person? What if it came from your own mind? This is the final revelation, and for many people, it's the hardest truth to accept. Throughout this journey, we've explored projection, emotional triggers, hidden insecurities, manipulation tactics, and psychological patterns. We've looked at how people influence others through guilt, fear, approval, and emotional pressure. But beneath all of it lies a deeper reality. Manipulation only becomes powerful when it finds something inside us to connect with. An insecurity, a fear, a wound, a belief that we're not enough. Think about it. Two people can hear the exact same criticism. One person collapses emotionally, the other remains calm. Why? Because manipulation doesn't work through words alone. It works through unresolved emotions. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. The more you understand yourself, the harder you become to control. The more honest you are about your fears, the less others can use them against you. The more secure you become internally, the less dependent you become on external approval. And that's where true personal power begins. Not in controlling others, not in winning arguments, not in proving people wrong, but in mastering yourself. Most people spend years trying to change the behavior of difficult people, trying to make manipulators understand, trying to convince toxic individuals to become fair. trying to explain their pain to people who benefit from causing it. But the strongest psychological shift happens when you stop focusing on controlling others and start focusing on understanding yourself. Because awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize manipulation, it loses part of its power. The moment you identify your emotional triggers, they become harder to exploit. The moment you stop seeking validation from people who withhold it, you become emotionally free. And emotional freedom is something no manipulator can tolerate. Why? Because manipulation depends on dependence. It depends on confusion. It depends on insecurity. But awareness breaks that cycle. Imagine walking through life able to recognize hidden motives, emotional traps, and behavioral patterns without becoming cynical or fearful. Imagine understanding people deeply without allowing them to control you. Imagine trusting yourself enough that someone else's approval is no longer necessary for your confidence. That is not just psychological knowledge. That is psychological freedom. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson hidden behind manipulation tactics. The goal is not to become a master manipulator. The goal is to become impossible to manipulate. To know yourself so well that deception becomes visible. To trust yourself so deeply that pressure loses its force. To stand so firmly in your own awareness that fear no longer decides your choices. Because the strongest mind in the room is rarely the loudest. It's the one that understands itself. Remember this. People can influence your emotions. They can challenge your confidence. They can attempt to shape your decisions. But they cannot control a mind that sees clearly. And the moment you truly understand yourself, you stop becoming a target and start becoming a force that cannot be moved.